getting shots like these really isn't that difficult in this day and age. All you need is a decent camera and something to smooth it out. And when Zhiyun said they had something new that would maybe help with that, well, I was interested. But when I learned that it was a gimbal, I wasn't really that excited because gimbals aren't something I use every day. But there is one big reason why I don't really use gimbals all that often, and well, I'm gonna blame my wife. But instead of me explaining it, let's have her explain it because maybe it won't sound as mean. Okay, so why don't you explain why we don't use gimbals very often?
They're a little too heavy for me.
What do you mean? You look super strong. All right, well, what about this one?
Oh, this one's easy. It's doable.
This is some A+ acting right here. But no, seriously, it's true. These gimbals just are so heavy for the use cases that we need. And when I need someone like my wife to help me out, it just means we have to rest between shots. Even when I'm doing it, it gets a little too heavy. So having something like the Crane M3S, well, it is a game changer, and it's gonna really change how we make videos together. Okay, so here is the gimbal. Now, at first look, you might not think it's all that different from last year's model, which was the Crane M3. And well, it really isn't, but there's a few key changes that I think make it worth considering. And the first one is its payload capacity. With last year's Crane M3, I mean, you could fly bigger cameras with interchangeable lenses, but it was still for those more mirrorless and smaller compact cameras. But with this generation, full frame cameras are now like officially supported. Before, you could definitely use them, but now it's kind of meant to be used with full frame cameras that weigh a little bit more because this has a higher capacity. So for instance, right now I am running the Canon R6, which is not the smallest camera in the world. Now, I will say you still do have to be selective with your lens choice. So I'm using the 10-18, but for gimbal shots, I usually go wide anyway. So that kind of works for me. And yeah, I know I have to use the crop sensor mode to get this lens to work. So it's not really a full frame camera, but that's not really the point. The point is that I can easily put this on the gimbal and it just works. Now, from a feature standpoint, if you're looking around the gimbal, isn't really all that different from last year, but I don't think that's a bad thing because there's a ton of great features built in. On the back, there is a pretty large touchscreen that you can use to control all the features. You can kind of do it through some of the buttons as well, but it's just easier to go in there and use the touchscreen. And this is where you can select all of your different modes for how it follows you, whether you want pan follow or you just want it to be locked or whatever mode you want to use. Easily just select it and get going. Now, I think one of my favorite improvements with this is just the ease of setup and the ease of use. That's always one of the things I've always hated with gimbals is how complicated they are to set up. You just kind of want to get going. And well, this lets you do that. There's a new 2-in-1 quick release system that lets you take the camera on and off very quickly, and everything locks, which is really nice. So right now I can just, move the camera however I like, and you can see that it locks, or I can unlock each axis and then it is free flowing so I can turn it on. It's really nice. But if I want to take the camera off, all I have to do is slide this one lever, pull the camera off, do whatever I need to do, and to put it back on, just slide it on, locks, and you're good to go. It's really that simple, and I don't have to rebalance anything. I don't have to, go through any settings. It's just ready to go. Although I will say, when you are balancing this for the first time, one feature I really like is that if you go into the screen, there's actually a menu that tells you the balance of the gimbal. So you can see if maybe one axis is off a little more than the others, so you can balance it and get it perfect so you get the most out of the motors. And it's just nice to get that in a visual reference instead of having to, perfectly feel the balance of everything, but it's just a nice little feature. So all of those features are great, but really the most important thing is how stable is your footage going to be, because this is very tiny, and with a big camera like this, it's iffy of whether or not it's going to work well. But I'll say it does work very well, and it feels like it's on a much bigger gimbal than it actually is. Now, of course, this is going to vary from camera to camera, but it kind of works like every other gimbal I've ever used. So if you're really diligent and perfectly careful with it, then you're going to get the smoothest video possible. But if you're just kind of walking around and being haphazard, you will see those kind of jitters where it moves the camera around, but it's still very smooth. And that's honestly like what I'm looking for most of the time with a gimbal. I'm not looking for like the smoothest cinematic shot all the time. Well, you can do that with this, but most of the time I just want it to not be like handheld. I just want it to be a little bit more smooth. And you can see from these shots that, it performs like a gimbal, and it's good enough that I'm not worried about it not being able to handle this camera. So that is good, but there is also a few other features here that make actually shooting
very helpful as well. So you got the joystick on the back so you can move the camera around. But one new feature is that there's now Bluetooth control. So instead of having to plug in over USB, which you still can do, you can also control your camera through Bluetooth. And this is supported for Sony, Canon, and a bunch of different cameras. And what's nice is you can use the buttons that are built in to control the camera instead of having to always reach to the top, which is another annoyance. And it's nice that you don't need any cables either, so that you can just kind of get rolling. Plus on the front, you get a dial that you can customize to do whatever you'd like. Now, I will say there is one feature that I don't see myself using like ever, but I guess I could see a use case for it, and that is right up here in front. There's actually a light built into this. So this is a 1000 lux LED, so it gets super bright, and the color temperature is adjustable, so you can go from warm to cool. And well, it does work, but I wouldn't say that it's all that flattering. And you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of like ghost hunting shows. Like this would be perfect for that. You're in a really dark abandoned building, got this light shining, you're not worried about how cinematic it looks. You're just trying to catch something on camera. Well, that's kind of what this is for. It's for when you need that light, and it's just easier to have it built in than have to bring something with you. I'm glad it's there because I mean, it doesn't really take away from anything, but it's not really something I'm going to use. But yeah, I mean, it's a gimbal. There's really not too much to say about it that you haven't heard before. It just happens to do it in a very small form factor. Oh, and by the way, the battery life is around 7.5 hours and it charges over USB-C. So, I mean, it's a kind of complete package that you would expect from a really big gimbal, but it can just fit in your pocket almost.
But yeah, that is the Crane M3S, and it kind of packs every feature you'd want from a really high-end gimbal, but packs it into a package that just doesn't really make sense because of how small it is. So I'm excited to use gimbals again and put them to use, and hopefully because of its form factor, I can use it a lot more places, and my wife can help me film along the way. If you want to learn more about this, pick one up for yourself. All those links will be down below, but I'm gonna go put this thing into use, and hopefully you'll see more videos from me using this thing very soon.